Imagine moving 2,000 miles away to completely escape your toxic past. You delete all your social media. You change your phone number. You finally feel safe. But then, on a random Tuesday, a battered shoebox is left on your front porch. The label says, T.O. the Homewrecker. Inside, a cheap burner phone, a $50,000 diamond ring, and a stack of photos of you sleeping in your new living room last night. And then the burner phone starts ringing. Here's why you should never open a package that isn't yours. Please like and subscribe for more. Thank you. Maya wiped a speck of dust from her pale oak coffee table, stepping back to admire the pristine, minimalist living room she had spent the last 3 weeks perfecting. She had moved 2,000 miles to escape the relentless madness of her old life. She had changed her phone number. She had deleted every single social media account she owned. For the first time in her 24 years, she was finally at peace. Her new aesthetic was simple: iced matcha lattes in the morning, quiet yoga sessions in the afternoon, and strictly minding her own business at all times. The suburban cul-de-sac she now called home was wonderfully, delightfully boring. Nothing ever happened here, and that was exactly how she wanted it. She turned toward the kitchen, ready to brew a fresh cup of tea, reveling in the silence of her new sanctuary. It was a perfectly ordinary Tuesday at exactly 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The sun was shining through the sheer curtains, casting warm geometric shadows on the hardwood floor. Everything was flawless. Everything was safe. Then a heavy, frantic pounding on her front door shattered the quiet, sending a violent jolt of pure adrenaline straight through her veins. Maya froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. She crept toward the door and looked through the tiny glass peephole. Through the distorted glass of the peephole, Maya saw absolutely nothing. The porch was entirely empty. The quiet suburban street behind her front lawn was still and undisturbed, bathed in the gentle afternoon sunlight. She held her breath, pressing her ear against the cool wood of the heavy door, listening for the sound of retreating footsteps or a car driving away. There was only the gentle rustling of the wind through the large oak trees lining the sidewalk. Slowly, her trembling fingers reached for the deadbolt. She turned it with a soft click and opened the door just a few inches, leaving the heavy brass chain firmly attached. She peeked out, scanning the meticulously manicured lawn and the empty driveway. There was no one in sight. A strange sense of unease washed over her, chilling the back of her neck, despite the warm weather. She was about to close the door and dismiss the noise as a prank by some neighborhood children when her eyes darted downward. Resting perfectly in the center of her welcome mat was a battered, heavily taped-up cardboard shoebox. It looked dirty, out of place, and entirely unwelcome on her pristine porch. Maya hesitated, her instinct screaming at her to lock the door and walk away. But her curiosity won. Maya unhooked the brass chain, opened the door fully, and stepped out onto the porch. The cool breeze did little to settle the nervous, fluttering in her stomach. She knelt beside the battered shoebox, her eyes instantly locking onto the messy, handwritten label plastered across the top. The delivery address was correct. It was her exact house number, her exact street, and her exact zip code. However, the name written in thick, angry black marker made her blood run cold. It read, in jagged capital letters, "To the Homewrecker." Maya gasped softly, stumbling backward until her shoulders hit the doorframe. Her mind raced with a dozen terrifying possibilities. Had someone from her past found her? Had the drama she spent 2,000 miles trying to outrun finally caught up with her? She grabbed the box, feeling its strange weight, and quickly retreated inside, slamming the heavy wooden door shut behind her. She slid the deadbolt into place with a loud, final clack. She carried the dirty box into her spotless kitchen, dropping it onto the marble island. She stared at it as if it were a venomous snake ready to strike. The thick layers of clear packing tape practically begged her to leave it alone. Against her better judgment, she reached for a pair of scissors. Maya's hand shook violently as she gripped the sharp kitchen scissors. She pressed the steel blades against the thick layers of packing tape, binding the battered shoebox. With a harsh ripping sound, she sliced through the adhesive. She pulled the cardboard flaps open, revealing a bed of crumpled, yellowed newspaper. The musty smell of old paper and damp cardboard filled the pristine air of her kitchen. Maya swallowed hard, her mouth suddenly completely dry. She carefully peeled back the layers of newspaper, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. There were 3 distinct items resting at the bottom of the box. None of them made any logical sense, and yet, together, they painted a terrifying picture. She reached in and pulled out the first item. It was a thick stack of glossy photographs held together by a tight red rubber band. Beside the photos lay a cheap, bulky black burner phone with a cracked plastic screen. And right next to the phone, nestled inside a small, velvet pouch that had spilled open during transit, was a massive, glittering diamond ring. The stone was impossibly large, catching the afternoon sunlight and scattering rainbow prisms across her marble countertops. Maya stared at the stolen treasure, a deep sense of absolute dread settling heavily in her stomach. Maya reached for the stack of glossy photographs first, her fingers trembling so much she almost dropped them. She snapped the red rubber band off and flipped the top picture over. A sharp gasp escaped her lips. The image was a clear, high-resolution shot of her new house, taken from the street. She quickly flipped to the second photo. It was another picture of her property, this time zoomed in on her front porch. The third picture made her blood run entirely cold. It was a photograph taken at night, showing her living room window. Through the glass, she could clearly see herself sitting on the couch, drinking tea, completely unaware that someone was watching her from the darkness. The pictures proved someone had been stalking her for days. The safety she thought she had finally found was nothing but a complete illusion. She dropped the photographs onto the counter as if they were burning her skin. She had moved across the country to escape the chaos of her old life, but the drama had somehow found her exact address. She backed away from the kitchen island, bumping into the refrigerator. Her mind spun with fear. Who took these pictures? And more importantly, what did they want from her? Trying to steady her breathing, Maya turned her attention back to the battered shoebox. She ignored the terrifying photographs for a moment and focused on the velvet pouch. She slowly reached out and picked up the heavy diamond ring. It felt freezing cold against her warm skin. The silver band was thick and clearly custom-made, supporting a stone so large it looked like it belonged in a museum, not a dirty cardboard box. She was not a jewelry expert, but even she knew this ring was worth an absolute fortune. It was the kind of heirloom people fought over, the kind of treasure that brought nothing but severe trouble. She placed it carefully back onto the marble counter, far away from the edge. Finally, she looked at the cheap, bulky black burner phone. The screen was completely blank, but tiny green light blinked steadily in the top corner, indicating that it was fully charged and currently active. It sat there like a ticking time bomb waiting to explode. The silence in her kitchen was deafening, broken only by the rapid, frantic sound of her own breathing. She wanted to throw the entire box into the trash, but she was frozen in place, staring at the plastic device. The sudden, piercing ring of the burner phone shattered the silence of the kitchen, making Maya jump nearly a foot in the air. The loud, synthetic melody echoed off the white walls, sounding incredibly harsh and unnatural in her peaceful home. She stared at the cheap plastic device as it vibrated violently against the smooth marble countertop. The caller ID simply read, "Unknown caller," in blocky green letters. Maya's first instinct was to run. She wanted to sprint out the back door, hop the wooden fence, and never return to this house again. But she knew she could not hide forever. The terrifying photographs proved they knew exactly where she lived. If she ignored the call, things might only get worse. Her hand hovered over the phone, her fingers shaking uncontrollably. The device continued to ring, demanding her attention. With a deep, shuddering breath, she grabbed the phone and pressed the green button to accept the call. She slowly brought the cold plastic speaker up to her ear, completely terrified of who might be waiting on the other side of the line. She closed her eyes, bracing herself for the absolute worst. She opened her mouth to speak, but she did not get the chance. Before Maya could even whisper a simple hello, a frantic, aggressive woman's voice exploded through the tiny speaker. "I know you have him in there," the woman screamed, her voice shrill and filled with raw fury. "Do not try to lie to me, you absolute home-wrecking trash." Maya flinched, pulling the phone slightly away from her ear. "Excuse me." Maya stammered, completely caught off guard by the intense hostility. "Who is this?" "You know exactly who this is," the woman yelled back, the anger in her voice escalating. "I tracked a package. I know it was delivered to your exact address 10 minutes ago. Tell him it is officially over. He can stay with you, but I am keeping the dog, and I am definitely keeping the car." Maya's mind raced, desperately trying to make sense of the chaotic situation. "Ma'am, please, you have the wrong person," Maya pleaded, her voice trembling. "I live here completely alone. There is no man in this house, and I do not know what you are talking about." "Liar!" the woman shrieked so loudly the tiny speaker crackled with static. "I am coming over there right now to get what belongs to me, and you better stay completely out of my way if you know what is good for you." The line went completely dead. The angry woman had hung up, leaving Maya listening to the hollow dial tone. Maya lowered the burner phone, staring blankly at the dark screen. Her heart pounded furiously against her ribs, her entire body shaking with a mixture of confusion and pure terror. She placed the phone down on the counter next to the massive diamond ring and the disturbing Polaroid pictures. The situation was spiraling entirely out of control. She had sworn to avoid drama, but somehow, the most insane drama imaginable had found her exact address. Maya rushed to her front window, moving with frantic energy. She pressed her back against the wall, carefully peeking through the narrow gap in the sheer white curtains. The quiet suburban street looked exactly the same as it had an hour ago. The sun was shining brightly, and the large oak trees swayed gently in the afternoon breeze. But the peaceful illusion was completely shattered. She knew that angry woman was on her way right now. She needed to call the police immediately. She turned away from the window, rushing back toward the kitchen to grab her actual personal cell phone, completely unaware that her terrifying ordeal was only just beginning. Just as Maya's fingers brushed the smooth glass of her personal cell phone, the deep, rumbling sound of a heavy engine echoed from the street outside. It was a loud, aggressive noise that did not belong in her quiet suburban neighborhood. She froze instantly, the phone slipping from her sweaty grasp and clattering onto the floor. Maya crept slowly back into the living room, staying low to the ground. She crawled toward the front window, her breathing shallow and ragged. She carefully pulled back a tiny corner of the curtain and peered outside. Her stomach dropped like a heavy stone. A massive, heavily tinted black SUV had just parked directly across the street from her house. It sat perfectly still, blocking her neighbor's driveway. The engine continued to idle loudly, a low, menacing growl that sent shivers down her spine. The dark, tinted windows made it absolutely impossible to see who was sitting inside. Maya watched in absolute horror, waiting for the angry woman from the phone call to jump out and storm up to her front door. But no one moved. The doors remained tightly shut. The vehicle just sat there, watching her house, like a mechanical predator waiting patiently for the perfect moment to strike. Before Mrs. Gable could fully explain her mysterious plan, a loud, heavy slam echoed from the street outside. Maya jumped, her eyes darting toward the front window. The driver's side door of the black SUV had finally opened. Maya and Mrs. Gable quickly moved to the living room, hiding behind the sheer white curtains to watch the unfolding scene. Stepping out of the dark vehicle was the woman from the phone call. She did not look like a heartbroken, betrayed wife. She looked tough, mean, and incredibly focused. She was dressed in dark clothing, her face fixed in a deeply aggressive scowl. She slammed the heavy car door shut and immediately began marching directly across the street, heading straight for Maya's perfectly manicured front lawn. Her boots stomped loudly against the pavement. "She is coming," Maya whispered in sheer panic, instinctively stepping backward away from the glass window. "What do we do? We have to lock all the doors and hide." Mrs. Gable simply stood her ground, her arms crossed confidently over her chest. "We do absolutely nothing, dear," the older woman replied calmly, her eyes fixed on the approaching scammer. "We just watch the show. The grand finale is about to begin right now." The aggressive scammer reached the edge of Maya's driveway, her eyes locked intensely on the front door. She marched up the concrete path, her heavy boots crushing the delicate pink flower petals Maya had carefully planted just last week. Maya's heart pounded furiously in her chest as the woman raised a clenched fist, fully prepared to pound fiercely on the wooden door. But before the scammer's knuckles could even make contact with the wood, the loud, high-pitched screeching of burning rubber shattered the quiet suburban air. A second vehicle, a sleek silver sedan, came speeding wildly around the corner of the cul-de-sac. It was moving dangerously fast, completely disregarding the neighborhood speed limits. The scammer froze on the porch, whipping her head around to look at the approaching car. Maya and Mrs. Gable watched in stunned silence from behind the living room curtains. The silver sedan slammed hard on its brakes, skidding loudly across the pavement before coming to a violent, jerky halt right behind the scammer's idling black SUV. The driver's side door flew open instantly. The situation had just escalated from a terrifying standoff into absolute, unpredictable chaos, and Maya had no idea what was going to happen next. A young, frantic-looking man jumped out of the silver sedan. He was wearing a wrinkled business suit, his tie loosened, and his hair sticking up wildly in every direction. He looked completely panicked, completely out of breath, and entirely desperate. He ignored the scammer standing on the porch and sprinted directly toward Maya's front door. The scammer quickly stepped in his way, blocking his path with an aggressive stance. "Who the hell are you?" the scammer demanded sharply, her tough facade returning instantly. "Back off, lady. I have a massive emergency," the panicked man yelled, trying to push past her. Maya watched from the window, her mind completely spinning. "Is that the cheating husband?" Maya whispered urgently to Mrs. Gable. "Did he actually show up?" Mrs. Gable chuckled softly, shaking her head. "No, dear. Pay very close attention. This is where the plot twists." Out on the lawn, the young man pointed frantically at the house. "I shipped a package here by mistake," he shouted at the scammer. "I entered the wrong house number on the shipping website. It was supposed to go to the house exactly one street over. I need that box back right now. My entire life depends on it." The massive plot twist hit Maya like a heavy freight train. The panicked man on her lawn was not a cheating husband, and the scammer was definitely not a scorned wife. The unhinged woman was just a professional thief trying to steal a valuable package, and the desperate man was simply a terrified romantic who had made a terrible typing error on his shipping address. The massive diamond ring sitting on Maya's kitchen counter belonged to him. He had accidentally sent his incredibly expensive engagement ring directly to a stranger's house. Maya's front yard had officially become ground zero for a bizarre, accidental jewelry heist. Out on the grass, the scammer realized her carefully planned con was completely falling apart. She lunged forward aggressively, shoving the desperate fiancé backward. "The box is mine, kid," she snarled, reaching inside her dark jacket. "Get out of my way before you get hurt." The young man stumbled but quickly recovered, jumping back into the scammer's path to block her from reaching the front door. "No way," he yelled bravely. "That ring cost me my entire life savings. I am not letting you steal it." The two strangers began shouting furiously at each other on Maya's lawn. Maya could not believe what she was watching. Her quiet, perfectly boring suburban sanctuary had turned into an absolute war zone. She reached for the deadbolt, fully prepared to open the door, hand the ring over to the desperate fiancé, and tell everyone to get off her property immediately. But Mrs. Gable grabbed her wrist gently, stopping her in her tracks. "Wait," Mrs. Gable whispered confidently, a knowing twinkle in her sharp eyes. "Just listen." Suddenly, the distant, unmistakable sound of wailing police sirens pierced through the chaotic shouting. The high-pitched noise grew steadily louder, echoing rapidly through the quiet neighborhood streets. Out on the front lawn, the scammer completely froze. Her aggressive demeanor vanished instantly, replaced by absolute panic. She looked wildly down the street, realizing her time was entirely up. Mrs. Gable smiled brightly, looking incredibly proud of herself. "I told you I handled it, dear," she said to Maya. "I listened to the local police scanners every single day for fun. I called the cops the absolute second I saw that notorious black SUV park across the street. I gave them her exact license plate number," she said smoothly. "They have been actively looking for her for several months now." The wailing sirens grew deafeningly loud as two black and white police cruisers turned the corner, their bright red and blue lights flashing wildly across the neighborhood houses. The professional scammer realized she was completely trapped. Panic took over her entirely. She abandoned her aggressive posture, shoved the bewildered fiancé roughly out of her way, and made a desperate, sprinting dash across the freshly cut grass toward her idling black SUV. She was surprisingly fast, her heavy boots tearing up the sod as she ran. But in her blind, terrified panic, she completely failed to notice the small obstacles in her path. Maya watched in absolute awe as the scammer's foot caught hard on the edge of a heavy, solid stone decorative garden gnome sitting near the flower bed. The woman let out a sharp yell as she pitched violently forward, her arms flailing wildly in the air. She crashed face first into the soft dirt, completely ruining her tough, intimidating image. Before she could even attempt to scramble back to her feet, the police cruisers slammed to a halt behind her vehicle. Four uniformed officers jumped out immediately, drawing their weapons and shouting loud, clear commands for the woman to stay down on the ground. The scene outside was pure, unfiltered chaos, but it was finally coming to an end. The officers quickly surrounded the stunned scammer, pulling her up from the dirt and securely snapping heavy steel handcuffs around her wrists. She glared angrily at Maya's house as she was shoved into the back of a police cruiser, her elaborate jewelry heist completely ruined by a simple typing error and a nosy elderly neighbor. Maya slowly unlocked her front door and stepped out onto the porch, clutching the small velvet pouch tightly in her hands. The cool evening breeze felt refreshing against her flushed skin. The panicked fiancé rushed over to the porch, looking completely exhausted and deeply apologetic. "I am so incredibly sorry for all of this," he babbled, wiping sweat from his forehead. "I was just so nervous about the proposal. I typed the wrong street name on the form." Maya offered him a gentle, reassuring smile. She opened her hand and handed him the velvet pouch. "I believe this massive rock belongs to you," she said softly. The young man opened the pouch, saw the diamond ring was perfectly safe, and nearly collapsed with pure, overwhelming relief right there on the wooden steps. With the scammer safely arrested and the stolen jewelry completely recovered, the police officers briefly took statements from everyone involved. They thanked Mrs. Gable for her incredibly sharp eyes and her quick phone call. Within 30 minutes, the police cruisers drove away, taking the drama with them. The young fiancé thanked Maya profusely at least a dozen more times before finally getting back into a silver sedan and driving away to propose to his girlfriend. The quiet, boring suburban peace slowly returned to the cul-de-sac. The sun began to set, casting a warm golden glow over the neighborhood. Maya stood on her front lawn, still wearing her comfortable pajamas, feeling completely exhausted but incredibly relieved. She looked down at her hands. She was holding the plate of fresh chocolate chip cookies Mrs. Gable had brought over. The elderly neighbor patted Maya's shoulder gently. "Well, that was certainly an exciting Tuesday afternoon." Mrs. Gable chuckled softly. "Welcome to the neighborhood, Maya. I promise it is usually much quieter than this." Maya laughed softly, taking a large bite of a warm cookie. She had survived her first day of suburban chaos. She turned around and walked slowly back inside her perfectly safe home. Maya closed the heavy wooden front door behind her, sliding the brass deadbolt into place with a satisfying, final click. The silence inside her house felt entirely different now. It was no longer a terrifying, empty silence waiting to be broken. It was a peaceful, comforting quiet. The intense drama was officially over. She walked into the kitchen, placing the plate of cookies on the marble island. She threw the battered shoebox, the terrifying Polaroids, and the cheap burner phone directly into the trash can. She was completely done with other people's insane problems. She walked into the living room, picked up her favorite ceramic mug, and poured herself a fresh, steaming cup of green matcha tea. She sat down on her perfectly clean sofa, pulling a soft blanket over her legs. She looked directly across the room, smiling softly to herself. "So yeah, that was my Tuesday," she whispered into the empty room, feeling a deep sense of calm wash over her. "No more drama for me. I am officially retired." She lifted the warm ceramic mug toward her lips, ready to finally relax and enjoy the entirely peaceful life she had worked so incredibly hard to build. Just as the soothing, warm matcha tea touched Maya's lips, a sharp, familiar sound pierced the absolute silence of the living room. It was not the cheap, synthetic melody of the terrifying burner phone. It was the customized, bright marimba ringtone of her actual, highly personal cell phone resting on the coffee table. Maya froze completely, her muscles tensing instantly. She had changed her phone number just 3 weeks ago. She had given the new digits to absolutely no one except her mother and her new employer. Nobody else on the entire planet knew how to reach her. Her heart began to pound a familiar, frantic rhythm against her ribs. She slowly lowered the mug, her hands trembling slightly once again. She leaned forward, staring at the bright, glowing screen illuminating the dark wooden table. The caller ID did not display a name, nor did it show an unknown number. Instead, the screen simply displayed 5 terrifying, perfectly capitalized letters that made her entire body run completely cold. She stared at the name from her darkest past, the color draining entirely from her face. Her fingers went numb, and the ceramic mug slipped from her grasp, shattering violently against the floor. Cut to black.